give you a little bit of background information about him, and I'm going to read this because it's very impressive.
Oh.
I don't want to mess it up. Dr. Iverson has been the dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies since 2013 after serving on the task force on curricular reform that led to the creation of the school. He previously chaired UT's Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry and served as the director of the Texas Institute for Drug and Diagnostic Development. Dr. Iverson is best known for developing a cure for late-stage anthrax infection. He holds the Warren J. and Viola May Raymer Professorship and teaches an immensely popular two-semester sequence of organic chemistry while also running an active research program. He's won numerous teaching awards and is currently the president of the UT System Academy of Distinguished Teachers. He has received his bachelor's degree in chemistry from Stanford University in 1982 and a PhD in chemistry from the California Institute of Technology in 1987. This session that he's going to be talking to you about today focuses on teaching large classes, and this is one of the sessions that was requested by our faculty members. Some of those are here in the room today, so I'm very excited that you're here. We said 75 plus students, and you said 500 students, so that's great. So in face-to-face and online environments, he's taught more than 12,000 students, usually large, soft, or beginner classes. He will share his insights, successes, and challenges with you today, and also talk about assessing student learning within that supersized classroom. So without further ado, we welcome Dr. Iverson.
Thank you. I don't think I need this. Okay, I don't think I'm going to use that mic because I might like be tempted to break out in song or something. It's got a grace. No, it's not okay. Thank you. That was a little out of date. I'm no longer the president of the UT System Academy of Distinguished Teachers, of which we have 3 members here, which is fantastic. What I want to do today is I want to tell you about what's going on in my class, how things have gone for the last, about 20, 25 years, evolved to a point where I don't assume this is anywhere near the best it can be. And so I would consider this more a progress report than anything else. But I'll just tell you how I approach teaching. And we have classes of about 500 students. And we have to do that because both general chemistry and organic chemistry is a service course for a very large number of our STEM students. And so we got to the point about 10, 15 years ago where we had no choice. We just had to start filling the large lecture halls because we ran out of faculty and we never seemed to run out of students who wanted a STEM degree. And so before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that it is Halloween. And so this is what I always do this on Halloween. And so the chemistry faculty will think that's funny because I walk in and say, you know, name's Bond, Pi Bond, and it's a chemistry thing, but I wanted to acknowledge it was Halloween. I'm glad we have somebody who's dressed up because I was thinking, I don't want to dive into this right away and not acknowledge, hey, this is Halloween, one of my favorite holidays. I figured if I wore the tux, it would be a little off, so I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Okay. But when thinking about this, and I apologize for the small font there, but when thinking about what I was going to talk to you about, I really wanted to emphasize a few key points. So I think there's something unique about teaching a large class. And one of the things you have to get across is you have to have, despite the large size, I'm going to actually show a video of my class that I took, just so you see what I'm talking about. They didn't know why I was taking the video, but I did. You have to inspire them in a way that's really difficult with so many students, but that's really important. And it's a stated goal that I have of trying to figure out how to reach them at a human level, knowing darn well there's 500 of them, one of me. And I don't think that matters whether it's 75 or 500. It's not the same as a seminar class where we're going to be sitting around a table. And so I go out of my way to make that connection. And then something that is certainly not unique to my class, but is definitely true of technical classes, there is a ton of information. And so one of the big issues is that the students are not going to have access to me. I only have 5 TAs. They're not going to have access to the TAs like you normally would. So we have to figure out how to make that information available. And I'm going to spend a lot of time showing you how we make that available to the students when it comes to the information. I'll go through why I think there's some ways that you can inspire students. One of the most important is to jump out of character at times in the class, which is something that I do. And I know that some other great teachers at the University of Texas at Austin do the same thing. And I think it's very important. I'll jump out of the sort of professor of chemistry mode for a while, and that helps make that human connection, even though there's so many students out there. My entire class is organized around teaching students how to think and not memorizing things. And I'll go through that. But I think that's another way that you can connect, I think, with a lot of students, because they really do appreciate that and they buy into it. And then finally, the assignments are designed to create opportunities for student learning. And I take very seriously the notion that my students have really busy lives and they are making all kinds of decisions that mean I need to be taking very close account of how much time I'm having them spend on my assignments and make darn sure that's well used. Because they appreciate that and they'll respond in kind. So I'm going to go through all of that. Okay. So this is my class. I'll tell you what's going on there in a second. But that was my class, so you could just get an idea of what it looks like. I personally hate that classroom. We just got moved there because my building is being renovated. And so it puts me on an elevated stage, which is ridiculous. And it's just, that's a weird thing to have happen. But I just wanted to kind of give you that feeling. All right. So there's two things I do, and I want to start out by talking about how I come out of character. So there's two things that I do for the class, and that's a picture of one of them. And turns out the best thing that I ever do, that I love to do in my life, is go scuba diving, take pictures underwater. So every other chapter when I finish, I show students some pictures I've taken and tell them a story. And so one of the things that does is it breaks up the class. It takes 5 minutes, about once every week or two. But it's one of the things the students remember the most, because I'm always telling them some reason why they need to be careful about the oceans and why they need to be conserved. And so by talking about the ocean like that, it has nothing to do with organic chemistry. They get a little bit of an insight that I'm not just somebody who's trying to, teach them chemistry, but maybe I have some own interest of mine. And that's something that I think is very important. And it's interesting how a lot of students will relate to this in ways that brings them in, and they'll talk to me about this instead of just talking about the organic chemistry. Other faculty members that I know will do the same thing, and it sounds weird, and I don't think it would make a whole lot of sense in a smaller class, but in a bigger class, it kind of decreases that distance between them and me just a little bit, because they can suddenly see me, instead of being somebody on a stage, they can see me as a real person, and that's the goal. My goal is not to find an audience for my pictures. It's to really change that. To tell you how interesting this is, one of the things that is a real common experience for me, this whole idea of the distance between me and the students in the class, is quite often they'll come up to me, and one of the things they'll do is they'll say, "Wow, you're short." And I know that sounds weird, but it's because they're used to seeing me on a stage. And I am short, but I don't look it from far away when they're looking at me on a stage. Right here, you can tell. But when you're sitting way back in that room, I kind of look tall, which is really weird. And they'll walk up and go, "Wow, you're short." And so that just shows you that there's this distance that you have to overcome. But that's not actually the main thing that I do. I'm going to spend a lot of time today showing you what is really the heart and soul of the class, which is the website. So this is my website, which took 25 years to develop. So it turns out that my older brother is a web developer, and he was before we even knew what that was, in the 1990s. And so he's also not a particularly generous person. So for Christmas one year, he taught me how to build a website. I gave him this really expensive gift, and he taught me how to build a website, best gift I could have ever gotten. So since, the middle 90s, I've known how to build a website, and it's just been kind of accumulating, because this gets to this point that I wanted to make about having information accessible 24/7 to students. And I'm going to go through what all these different things are and how they've evolved. But what I wanted to show you is something that I am probably best known for at the university, actually. it's this. So it turns out, that's a picture of my class. And that's not my whole class, but that's the 164 who ran in a 5K race that was on campus. Now, why is this important? This is important because one of the things that dawned on me, I don't know, about 1990, was that the students in my class were physically fit, but they weren't going to stay that way. And most of them want to be physicians. And so for a lot of reasons, I decided to start encouraging them to run in a race. This has nothing to do with organic chemistry, but it's real easy to simply say to them, you know what, how can you be a physician if you're not physically fit? And number two, you can try to be successful, but you're not going to be successful if by the time you're my age, you're worrying about your health. And so let's fix that. The way you don't worry about your health is you start thinking about it now. So we're going to run a 5K race. And so what this means, organic chemistry nomenclature is exactly as fun as that sounds. And so and this is always between the second and third midterm. I have 3 midterms and a final. And if I get 20% or more of the class to run in the 5K race, then we don't do nomenclature for the rest of the semester, which is good for me because I hate teaching nomenclature. But they've had enough. I kill them with it the first 2 midterms to make darn sure they're motivated to run the race. But I will have students tell me over and over again, and this is the Monday after the race, they're all wearing their race shirts. I have students tell me over and over again that they forgot most of what they learned 10 years ago in my organic chemistry class, but they still run because that got through. And the way it gets through is that video I showed, there was a man who was speaking. He's actually a world-class runner, and I happen to know some really great runners. And they come in and they motivate them and talk to them about how important fitness is. And they only do a 10-minute cameo and then leave. Students never forget these visits. And so it's not only the fish pictures, which only take about total maybe 20 minutes the whole semester. And then I have I have 3 people in, including I've had silver medalists from the Olympics. I've had some other people in who just inspire them to think about running. And by doing that, it really changes the dynamic in the class because they understand that I'm thinking much more than just what they're going to be doing in organic chemistry. And again, the goal is, number one, I have 500 young people and I want them to think about fitness, lifelong fitness. That's an important issue. But number two, it really breaks down that distance that occurs in the class. And that's something that you really need to do because it makes it so that they take me a whole lot more seriously because they know what I'm trying to do is help them. And so I think this is a big deal, and it's something that it certainly doesn't have to be erased, but if you can think about ways to interject your own personality, your own thinking, your own interest in their success into a class besides just the material, that really changes the dynamic in the classroom. Okay. So that was that first issue of how to inspire students. The second is how do you provide information, because they don't have access to live human beings. So they're going to have to access information on something like a website. And so this whole site is designed in many ways to provide information that the students are going to need when they need it. I don't need to tell you that often that important question comes to their minds not at a time that's ideal to interact with a faculty member. Yeah, so this is really helpful. First and foremost, I think it's important that students understand in a given lecture what was important. And so these things are called rules of the day. And if you go to any day at a lecture that we've had, for example, this was Friday, those are the important things that they learned in bullet form. They're not fully explanatory, but it's important things that they've learned. And so and I curate this because I usually have more, I put this up before class, and this is what they're seeing when they walk into class. But it's just, and it's written in a language they'll understand if they went to the lecture and they saw it. Now, this is also extremely important, I believe. All of my lectures are recorded. And that means, and I'm going to show you what in a little bit, how that really changed the dynamic in the class without my knowledge, but in a great way. But all the classes are recorded because that way students have access to seeing where things are even after the fact. And these are a guide to what I talked about on a given day, so they even know which lecture to go to see. So it's a really easy interface for them if they want to see the recorded lectures. Now, one thing that you'll notice, so if you weave through this, I'll explain more of it. But these are all the different lectures that are there. They can click on that and they can watch the lecture. What they tend to do, and this is something that medical students do a lot, is they'll watch it at double speed. So a 50-minute lecture takes 25 minutes, and I sound like a chipmunk, and that's probably pretty amusing. But it's really efficient, time efficient, because they see everything they want. They can stop it when they want. They can zoom in and out. And so it's really easy for them. There's a lot of other things we record, but I'll explain that in a minute as well when we talk about student support. So faculty have different reactions to this. Some definitely like the idea of recording lectures, as in two of us. The vast majority don't want their lectures recorded. So I don't know what to say about that. I will say that I've learned that it makes me a lot less funny because I don't want to say anything that I haven't thought through that could be shown and cause some damage. Because I tend to say some things that maybe are not well thought out. So I tend to be a little bit more reserved, and I'm not as spontaneous and funny. Okay, that's the downside. On the other hand, I think having lectures available for students is a very useful thing. And in a class of this size, I think it's frankly essential. So the larger the class, the more I'd consider having the lectures recorded. Now, when I say recorded, what does that actually mean? It turns out in the old lecture hall that I was in, that I liked much better, it had essentially a security camera that would take a picture of me, and I was really small, but then I have 3 screens for people to see what I'm doing, and the screen on my left was being captured in real time. And I could put 3 independent things on the screens, which sometimes I do, but I know at all times it's only the screen on my left that's being captured. So that's really big, and then I'm really small in the corner. That's the way it worked in the old lecture hall. In this lecture hall, I'm not even shown. It's only what's being shown on the screen. And for that reason, my class is all not PowerPoint. I use a document camera. And I decided to do this a long time ago, because if I want students to follow along, I can start doing PowerPoint, and I can start hitting all of the main points, and I'm just going to lose them real quick. I want them to interact with me. I want to interact with the lecture. They can't write any faster than I can, so I make sure that what I want them to see is going to be written down at the same time that they can write it down. And that's projected on the screen, but the students are seeing that at the same time. And then they're hearing my voice. My voice is recorded at all times as well. So that's what I mean by lecture capture. There's some other lecture capture systems we have on campus, but the classroom right now, it only captures the electronic side of that, which is, I think still a pretty good idea. Okay, any questions so far? Yeah.
What made you decide to use a website as opposed to an LMS?
Because of all the different things that I can put in here that are very difficult, especially when we were using Blackboard. That was so limited in what you could do. And so I do have a big Canvas site I'm about to show you. They're seamlessly integrated. I jumped to it just when I did the lecture capture. I jumped to the Canvas site. You probably noticed that. And so now they're integrated pretty well. But these resources that are built here are far easier to build. I use Dreamweaver. Using Dreamweaver than anything you try to build into Canvas. There's something like 1,500 pages buried in here, and those would be a nightmare on Canvas. And so we have it so that you seamlessly go between the two, and that's something I'm going to show you in a little bit of how that's done. But it's, for example, when we went from Blackboard to Canvas, that would have been a career-ending move for me if I had built everything in Blackboard. Yes. So I will tell you, going with an Adobe product like Dreamweaver or any of the other ones, you have a level of independence that you know is going to stand the test of time, and you're in control of it. You don't have to worry about it. And these days, they seamlessly integrate with each other, which is beautiful. So, yeah.
Go back and forth between the, yay, I love having everything recorded as well as having it back face-to-face, so we can have as much information as possible. But over the last 2 years, I've done some data collection, my face-to-face section, and then we have an online section. What percentage of these videos are you watching? Are you
video. So are there ways that encourage, and I put quizzes over the lecture? I don't know if there's Google answers or what's going on. It's kind of been a problem for me. I see that my face-to-face students, they like it, like, oh, we can go back and watch what maybe
Yeah.
happened in class. I don't know, it's just having two totally different platforms. Why is there such a discrepancy there?
Yeah, I don't know. I've never taught an online class.
Okay.
So I have no idea how to reach that audience. I know that my students really do like see, a lot of faculty are afraid that if you're recording your lectures, no one's going to come to class. That's not true. No, I don't either. I don't either, because they actually like that human contact. And so it's just a backup. I'm going to show you actually how I found out how they were using that backup to advantage. But I haven't really seen that as being a problem, to be honest. All right, good question. So let's see. Something else, and this was a new feature that I can't believe I never did this before. One of the things that students asked me to do would be download everything that they were seeing that I was doing up in front of class. And it takes me literally 5 seconds to copy it into a PDF, send it to myself, and then I just upload it. So while they're going through the lectures on the video, they can go through everything that I was writing. And it gives them a chance to really stay up with the material, and especially if they miss the material. I think that's just so important. All right. Now, in class, I don't just write on the notes. It's very important to remember that there are 500 people. There's a lot of distractions out there. So whether it's 70 or 500, they're trying to figure out if that cute person next to them is noticing them, or that they've sat next to them the entire semester and never said hello. And there's all kinds of things going on in their heads. And so it is important to keep things moving and keep things changing up. And so quite a while ago, what I learned to do is make sure that I could use programs that instead of just describing molecules, I can really show them what's going on with the different kinds of molecules and how they're going to interact. And so if I want to talk about how different molecules are attracted to each other, I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing there, but that's explaining things in a really powerful way. But I'm making sure that I'm not doing this for very long, because people tend to gloss over it pretty quickly. But during class, I intentionally make sure that I'm showing something like this at least once a lecture, right in the middle, to try to get their attention again. And instead of just talking and writing notes, by showing something or having something interjected right in the middle, right when they're kind of losing attention, really does seem to help. And I do think that's important in a larger room where your simple glance can't bring them back, because they know that you can't really see them. And so that's important to always think about, okay, what am I gonna do that's gonna get them to do something and say something? Yeah. 50 minutes. 50, yeah. I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Tuesday, Thursdays are an hour and 20, but I teach 50. Right, so I wait about a half an hour in, and then wherever it's appropriate, I'll start showing them things that help describe what it is we've talked about. One of the issues is, how do we make sure that since they can't do this themselves, if they have questions about it, what can they do? So along with the rules of the day, which are the take-home lessons, there's always pictures of the day. So for example, these were the things that I was showing on the computer and told them about. And they can go to the static picture. And I've got this loaded up for the same day. Now, it might seem like this is one heck of a lot of work. I only had to do it once, because the lectures do change, but these are all little modules. And so I can move them around. And I find out that this content pretty much lasts no matter how I reorganize the class. And so even though I may have shown this at a different time in a different place, the chemistry hasn't changed. So you can, once you build up these modules, and again, this is the idea, doing something like this in Blackboard gets really complicated. It is super easy to do this in one of these other programs, which is why I personally recommend doing it. Again, my brother taught me how to use these, and it's really pretty simple. Okay, so that's that. Learning. I mentioned this, and I want to re-emphasize it. The class is built around not memorization, but how to think. And one of the things that was really, I think, disturbing to me was I had a conversation with a colleague. And here was the thing. We had a graduate student go through their second year orals, And he and I were on the committee, and I was pretty young in the professor game. It was about 1994, 1995. And he and I jumped all over a graduate student because they said something that just couldn't have been true. And sure enough, we questioned him and got to the point where we knew it wasn't true. And the person admitted it, and we passed them and all. But we went to lunch, and my colleague and I had a discussion. I said, okay, you know, John, how come we could do that? And I was actually a little impressed with myself, to be honest, but confused how I could figure out when the student was off track. And so we started teasing that out. And what we realized was that 4 years of an undergraduate degree, 5 years in graduate school, 3 years as a postdoc, had taught me some fundamental principles that when I see one of those fundamental principles violated, I know something's wrong. It's not because I read a paper that was written in 1978 that happened to tell me that was wrong. It's because I realized that to any degree that success I was having was because after all of those years of education, I had come up with some simple things that I wanted to make sure were true. So we then challenged ourselves. We said, okay, well, what are those things? How come we knew this was wrong? And we got right to the heart of it. And so then I started writing down what I knew was the basis for my understanding of all of chemistry. And this is really sad and pathetic because there were only 7 things. 9 years of higher education, and I learned 7 things. But those became what I refer to as the golden rules of chemistry. And so they've expanded to 11 now, so I think I've learned a few new things. But it is really important, I think, to always establish this. And the class comes back to these over and over again. And they're fully explained at different places at different times, and they can go back to it. But these are things that totally transcend whatever the lecture is, first semester, second semester. And we can go through them. But I think it's really important when you're teaching, especially a large class or any class, to think about those things that you want them to take away, that you come back to over and over and over again. What are those themes? Collect them at the beginning and show students what they are. And so now they know to pay attention to this and pay attention to these things, because we might see them in chapters 2, 6, 8, and 9, but it's really the same idea, the same concept. And so that's something that I think has been really helpful, is to focus on that, because then they understand that I'm focusing on their learning. Okay. Now here's something else that is related to that point. That is something that a math professor taught me that I think is also very important. I need them to buy into the fact that, number one, I'm a human being. So I showed you how I try to do that. But number two, that I care about their success. Now, I think showing stuff like this makes them know that I care about their success. But what does success mean? And again, I'm teaching pre-meds. 500 pre-meds, if I had a grading scheme that made it so only 30% of them were going to get A's, only 40% were going to get B's, and then the C's and the D's were all prescripted ahead of time, they don't think I'm interested in their success. And that's not what I consider to be a healthy learning environment. Because these are the best students I'm ever going to see. I mean, I feel so privileged to be able to teach such great students. The filtering that has gone on before they show up in my class means they're all good. So what a math professor taught me to do, which we do now, is we have 2 grading schemes that we keep track of at all times. So number one, I think a curve is very helpful, especially if I write an exam that's too difficult. I don't want to be failing my entire class. In organic chemistry, that can happen. By the same token, if they all do really, really well, I don't want to be giving them a prescripted number of A's, B's, and C's that's arbitrary based on a curve. So what we do is we keep percentage scores, and then we keep a curve score. If my test was too hard, the curve raises them. If they all do really well, they get to keep the higher score, which is a percentage. If they all get over 90%, I'm happy to give them A's, because the tests are not easy. And so I do think that's important, especially in a large class. It's tempting, and for a decade I curved, and that's all I did. But I couldn't walk into a class and say, you know what, you can all succeed. And I want you to all succeed. And nothing says you can all succeed like a grading scheme that would allow them all to succeed independently. And what that does is it allows them to work together and not feel like, you know, their success has to come at the expense of their buddies. And this has been a complete attitude changer. Now, at the end of the day, the grades haven't really changed that much. But it really has changed the attitude in the class. And I have to thank, it's Mike Starbird who yelled at me one day. He said, how can you say you're interested in your students' success if you determine how many are going to succeed? And you do a better job, how come more can't succeed? Yeah.
I had a situation last week. I gave my first major exam. I had 70 students, certainly not 500, but I had a 22, and I had a lot of 90s. So I brought a number of them.
Yeah.
So the gentleman came in. I said, "Do you have any learning issues?" She said, "I get all A's and B's." I said, "Okay. Well, why do you think you got it?" I didn't know what to study. I said, "Okay." So I clicked on Canvas and went through it. I said, "Do you remember?" Now this is on my
Yeah.
She said, "I don't think I have that." So I said, "Well, how do you access it?" So she pulled out her phone. She opens it up, and it's this small,
Yeah.
right? And she's going through, and she says, "Oh, there it is." I think one issue is some of the tablets that they use, they're not seeing
That's a good point.
everything. And I'm beginning to notice it from this much things that I can see. I don't understand this. And I'll sort of show it to me. I can't read it. And if you can't open up a paragraph, I'm old fashioned. I want it big and I want it that and all that. I think that's an issue that I'm really beginning to take into account now. I remind them, make sure that you make a copy of whatever you have to do to read the entire article. You can't do it.
Yeah, one of the things you may notice, well, you won't because it's not shown up there at the top. This right here. So I started doing this because students asked me to. So if you click that, you get a PDF and you can print everything that's on there. Yeah, and that was, you know, I constant focus group with students. So for example, I had an appointment canceled right after class, and I knew that going to class. So I asked all my students, I said, hey, anybody want to come talk to me? And I took them in my office and we just chatted. And I got some really good suggestions that way, and I did all of them. It's another way that students understand you're invested in their success. And I would say that's the most difficult thing in a big class, but you can do it. If the number one, see you as a human being, and number two, realize you're interested in their success. That's your goal. You're not there to say, oh, you're not worthy unless you're getting an A in my class, because that's what they expect. But instead saying, I'm gonna do everything I can to help you. And that's where things like that they appreciate, because I agree with you on the screen part. You know, that's something I worry about, because this website, this works pretty well on a phone. Canvas doesn't. This thing works because it's designed that way. It'll scale accordingly. Okay, that is, those are some of the tools that I give them. But the most important thing, I think, is up right over there, was this tools to help you ace the class. So one of the things that I learned a long time ago is my students had no idea how to study my material. I don't have equations, I don't have formulas, which is what most students think science classes are all about. We have concepts, we have abstract ideas, we have geometries, and so we have to get them to think about a molecular world that they've never seen before. So one of the things I've spent a lot of time doing is developing tools for them to learn how to study, so that how to study link is all about something that a lot of students already know how to do, but it teaches them how to stay up with the material, outline the material, do everything that creates concept maps. And that's something that some students really need to see. And so when a student comes to me and they're really down, not doing well, I always start with, tell me exactly how you were preparing for everything that was happening in class. And then I just work on that and spend a lot of time on this to show them how to keep up to date. The other thing that I think has been particularly useful is this thing that we call a roadmap. And so it's a two-dimensional way for students to put all the different reactions they're learning. I'm not going to get too chemical on it. But put it all together and have them see things in their own format, but I usually have them make a poster. And so most of my students will have this in their room, a big poster that describes by the end of the semester all the different things they've learned. And to go along with that, these are all the different reactions they've learned. That's not enough for them to use that as a crib sheet. But that, on top of that two-dimensional diagram, is actually how they can really take all the material that they learned in the different chapters and put it into one picture that they can use, which is what we need at the end. They need to be drawing on things from all the different chapters. And so what students appreciate about this is that I've prepared this for them to save them the step of having to go through the book to find the different little pieces and go through the lectures. They appreciate I'm saving them time, but they certainly have got to, this doesn't mean anything unless you've actually experienced the rest of the class. But the goal, you know, the important point is that I don't assume that they know how to learn my material. And so there's this whole section on the website that allows them to figure that out. And I'm going to tell you a story about something that happened about 4 years ago that kind of scared me. And that was, my class was acting sort of the same as I would expect based on the averages on my exams. And I try to make my averages somewhere between 75 and 85%. That's what I try to shoot for. And I had a third midterm, which is usually one of the harder ones, and the average was about 89%. And we actually, that obviously caught our attention because I was a little concerned that maybe something was going on that I should be worried about. That same class took the final, and they had a 90% average on the final. Totally blown away by this. And so did some appropriate forensics and asked students, you know, what was going on. And I said, well, and I think all of you know this, but there was an alternative website for my class that I have no control over, that the students were communicating with each other. And they started passing around this idea. They said, you know, and this is one of those things that in retrospect, it was so obvious. You know, the best way to study for this class is to binge watch the lectures, like you would binge watch a TV show. So what they were doing was they were spending the weekend before the week of my exam binge watching all the lectures, double speed. It sounds like a really boring Saturday, but it really did help them. And so they passed that around, and they all were doing it. And the reason I know they were all doing it was I got inspired and I sent a survey around. And so it was not a CIS form or anything like that. It was a survey. And I asked them how they were studying. And so this is how they were actually studying. Now here's the part that I haven't said yet, which was particularly interesting. See this right here? I wrote our textbook. So it's my voice. It's in lockstep with my class. And so this tells you what they were doing and how they were doing. They told me. And then I had a lot of other things. And this is now something I do every year. I just send them a Survey Monkey, and they fill it out. It's amazing to me how many students fill this out for no reason. They've already got their grade. They're gone. They're in the summer. They're doing this. And then what I do is I post this, and I tell the other students, you know, the other class did as well as you could ever do. Look what they did. Here, they're telling you how they did this. And so it's really a different world, but I think it really helps us understand what is going on in class. And I learn something from this every time. And this validates the time and effort I spent to try to make it so that information is available to them right when they need it, as they need it. And again, why? I'm going to talk about it in a second, but they don't have access to us personally. They can go ahead and send me an email, but it's the first thing I tell them in class. I say, look, there's 500 of you, there's one of me. Don't send an email and expect to get a response, especially if it's 2 in the morning. It just doesn't work that way. So we have to make some changes, and we have to think about things, yeah.
When you survey them directed like this, do you worry at all that they just got, you know, survey overload because they have the ones coming from university and they do college and the department and then yours? Because I would like this, but I was worried that there's too much.
Right, well, so, you know, that's the interesting thing. So look, I had 181 people answer this out of 500 with absolutely no incentive on their part. And I do make it very simple for them to fill these out. But the interesting thing is most of them have benefited from the ones the previous year. So I think that's where the buy-in came from. The first time I sent out what I thought was a very flattering email, I said, you know, your class has done better than any class I've ever seen, in fact, that the department has ever seen. And we want to know exactly how you did it. So could you just please very quickly fill this out so we know what you're doing so that we can make sure that other students understand this. And I had about 130 or so people fill that out. And ever since, I've had about 150 to 200 will fill these out. Oh, no, this happens later. This is after the class is over. They've got their grade. In fact, they're gone. They're not even on campus. This hits them in their email right before Canvas shuts down my email list. Before that day happens, I just send this and say, this would be very useful. This is not during the class. This is when it's all finished. But other students find this very helpful. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Well, because they know, so you've obviously connected that they know you're interested in their success. That's right. Once you've done that, you'll get response, because they see that, and that's really, been the key. Okay. Another big problem that I worry about a lot is engagement with the material. So how do I get them engaged with the material? Because if all they have to do is show up to a class or even not show up to a class because they know I'm not taking roll, how do I know they're doing things? So one of the things that we have logistic problems. So unfortunately for organic chemistry, it does not lend itself to a lot of electronic homeworks because they have to draw things. And drawing things on a computer takes a very large amount of time. Even the best programs out there will take a lot of time for a student to draw things. And if you don't draw things, if you don't have that experience, you're not learning the material. You have to start with a blank piece of page and fill it up with structures and letters and electrons and figure out what's happening. And so we have paper homeworks. And those paper homeworks are now weekly. One of the most important things I ever did was switch to that. My department had gone away from them because it's too much hassle. But I have them turn them in. And this is an interesting thing that I think only works for pre-meds. So we were trying to figure out, we grade 3 of those homeworks detailed. They're usually 5 to 10 page homeworks, and hand back with feedback per semester. That's all we can handle. Because even that is about that high a stack of paper, no kidding, for the class. And my TAs couldn't possibly grade them every week. So most of the time we grade them for completion. They just turn them in. We give them a score. My former TA figured this out, of how much credit to give for each one of those homeworks. If all we're going to grade is for completion for most of them, what do we want to do? We want compliance, but we don't want it to make it such a large percentage of the class grade that it changes things. So he had the insight, which has lasted the test of time, to make them worth 1% on the next midterm. So each homework is worth 1% of the final midterm grade. You turn your homework in. If you get a score, we're going to add 1% to your score on the midterm. And I will get 100% compliance on my homeworks for adding 1%. Why? Because every pre-med is convinced they're going to get an 89. And they know that that's going to be the difference between an A and a B. So we get 100% compliance with virtually nothing. What they don't know is on the curve, we drop the average by the exact same number of points you would get by doing all the homeworks. So the curve itself was unaffected by that. But we do grade 3 of them in detail and give them feedback. And as I always tell them, and this is something else that has helped a lot, we tell them, we are going to make you cry on this grading. Because this is worth 1% of your grade. Your test is worth 99% of your grade. We're going to make sure we got you doing everything we don't want. We're going to get you on the homework so you don't do it on the exam. And they actually love that, even though we hammer them on the homeworks. But like I said, we only grade 1 homework before each exam to show them how to format, because we can't grade otherwise. So that's weekly engagement, and those are very challenging problems. I would argue that that's actually where most of the learning occurs in my class, is putting together those homeworks. And they buy into this. They understand that doing that homework and understanding that homework is what's going to get them a higher grade. And that's where I think a lot of the synthesis of all the information is taking place. But then there's another piece that I hadn't figured out until just this year, and it appears to be working well. No true data yet, so I'm just going to give you a progress report. What I always wanted students to do was read ahead in the book so that when I lectured over something, they had already understood the material, they've already seen it before, so I was filling in the blanks as opposed to filling up a totally blank sheet of paper in their minds. I couldn't get them to do this. I would sign it ahead, but I just couldn't get them to do this. Well, now, fortunately, my book is actually integrated into Canvas. And so what we can do is I can assign reading, and then there's an electronic quiz portion of that where they can answer some very simple questions. They're not taking much time, just 2 or 3 little questions that are embedded within the book. So they have to read ahead, so when I walk into lecture, I know they've at least thought of the material. And what we decided to do is give them, at the very end of the semester, 5% of their total grade is based on doing all of these homeworks, the percentage of these things they get right. And they get like 5 chances to get it right. I want everybody to get 100% if they do this. I just want them to be reading the material. And this has been, so far, gotten a lot of positive reviews from the students. But it's a bit complicated. It means at all times they're thinking of 2 different homeworks. So one of the things I've had to try to do is figure out how to organize all of this. And that's where we go to Canvas to organize it, because what I have for the class is I use the Canvas calendar function, which I really, really like. So for example, I'm going to talk more about all the different things on here. But this doesn't actually take me very long. So here was Friday's lecture. A student hits that, and here's what shows up. They want to go to the rules of the day for that day, they hit that. They go to the pictures of the day, they hit that. They want to see a video, they hit that. Now, the way this is integrated, this isn't as hard as you think to put together. I literally copy-paste this, and then I just change the links. It takes me maybe 30 seconds to update this for every different lecture. It's very easy, but it's right in front of them. And then, for example, before, well, Monday's lecture, they had to take a quiz. And so they click on that, and it takes them directly to the quiz, and they say, okay, here's the one that was due. And so here's the one that's due before class on Wednesday. It's just a couple of really simple questions. I now have gone from my website that I built in Dreamweaver to Canvas. I'm now on the publisher's website looking at these quizzes, and they just have to answer these. All they have to do is fill in A, B, C, or D. But there's no way they can do this unless they've read the section. And so this has been really helpful because there's no human being involved in this process. In other words, they just fill this in. So this is this has been one of my big challenges. How do I get them engaged every day? And this actually works. And interestingly, when I had a student focus group, they liked it. I thought they were going to hate this thing. They actually loved this. Yeah. 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 Yep.
Now they do the exact same thing about a week and a half ahead of what I'm lecturing on in class. They have to go do 10 easy questions.
Yeah, and that's the idea. And
Very low stakes, and they get 3 attempts to do it. So.
Exactly the same. And so this is something that I was waiting for. The key to this is that this actually seamlessly goes into the Canvas gradebook. And so even though I'm going to a publisher's website, it comes right back all seamlessly. And so it's all being taken into account. So they can easily, when they go on Canvas, they know exactly what their running percentage of these quiz scores are. All of which I couldn't do before. It was way too hard, but now you can do it. And yeah. Yeah, and it was pretty easy to build in, and I was really excited about that. Yeah.
I'm just curious about this. You allow your students to 1% for homework, they do it. Obviously, 100% help them learn.
Right.
You have about 500 in class. How does do you have a curve when you score? Do you have a long curve, or do you have something on the high end or the low end? I don't know that's going from about 25 to 30 to 70 semester. I'm looking more of a natural curve with this class than I have in the past. I don't know if the last year student body is
So I know the answer to that question. I'm trying to figure out how to say this in a way that makes the most sense. I don't have a natural curve. And the reason is because of the way my class is registered. So it's a fairly popular class. So it fills up pretty quickly. And the students who get registration privilege are the ones who came in with the most transfer credit because they're the most advanced for their year. And that gives them an edge when it comes to registering for my class. The other group that is in my class are the students we're most concerned about. So I have these two groups in the class who come in overprepared and underprepared. And I spend a lot of time trying to make darn sure those underprepared students are not left behind, but I don't have a normal curve. You can see what I just said in my grades. We have the students who really do great and others who struggle and we worry about and we move forward, but that's because of the way, that's unique to the way my class is registered. And right now it's about 300 open registration, about 200 at UT Austin, we call these success students. And yeah, but by the end of the semester, we're seeing this move forward. I still have a lot of room for improvement, and I'm going to show you what we've done to try to get that into one. Wait, which is the dromedary? Is that the one hump? Right, so we're trying to take the camel and turn it into a dromedary, is what we're trying to do, and I'm going to show you how we're doing that. But that's unique to my class. So anyway, these are the homeworks that they have to fill in. You can't do this by computer. You've got to do this by, by hand and fill it in because you're just not going to get it done. But that's the other kind of homework, which we've always done. Okay. And as soon as the answers are there, I post the answers, and so they'll see all the different stuff that we do. Okay. Any questions about that? That was the engagement piece. Yeah. It's an ebook. And so it's actually about half the price of a used edition of the paper book, which is something that I told the publisher, if we're not doing that, I'm out. I'm not even working on the project. One of the things we've done in that ebook actually is embedded a bunch of videos with the other author and myself. And we had this vision that we were going to be like the click and clack of chemistry. That's how we sold it to the publishers. And then we found out we're not that funny. And organic chemistry is not that funny. So they're not actually that amusing. But the goal was we would take a figure in the book. And I'm saying this because there's actually something that's happening in publishing that I think is really going to transcend just being on a computer. And that is we take the figure in the book that we know most students don't really understand. And then we explain it as if they were standing in front of us. And my co-author and I are going back and forth, trying to make each other laugh. But like I said, we discovered we're not that funny. And we would not have a radio show. But it's still something that they can see. And I've gotten great feedback on that. So it's more than just that experience. But it's a lot less. And that was my concern. Because I know that most of my students were getting electronic bootleg copies from Asia, if I can say it, and we're not buying the book. And so I said, look, I'm going to have you buy the book. So that's why I did this focus group. And I said, is all of this worth it? Tell me now. Is all of this worth it? And the answer was they felt yes because of this engagement, just like you're saying. Students wanted that daily engagement. They said, yes, darn right, this is worth it. Absolutely. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not, boy, I have to be careful what I say next. The textbook industry needs some realigning. I learned as a dean to always say things in the positive. And so this is one of those things. We're trying to figure out the price point for ebooks because, of course, there's no production cost, but they have turned into software companies. So what I was very worried about was that my 500 students was going to crash their server as they were trying to do their homework. No, it actually has been seamless. There were some bumps right early on, but it's working, which is nice. Because like I said, this is kind of a tricky thing. You went from my website on a UT server to the Canvas website to the publisher's website. That's not a given, but it's been working. It's been very robust, yeah. This is Cengage.
Is there a cost for the homework piece, Brian?
No.
So if we adopted that book with electronic version and try to do what you do here, the homework, how much the charge?
That's my understanding. I just said what I wanted and I got a price. Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I use Pearson, that's what I use. And I give them the option, they can buy the hardback, they can buy the three-hole punch, they can buy all digital, but they get the transcript platform at home. So whatever their comfort level is, they can buy assigned homework.
Yeah. I think we're going to see them pretty much, these companies zeroing in on something that works. I was pushing very hard, and I think this is sort of the beta version still. It's a little kludgier than it has to be, but they're going to get this right. Honest to goodness, what's going on is they're transitioning from these printing companies where they just kind of buy the content, print it, and then market the crap out of it. That's what they were, to software companies. They are legitimately software companies now. And the vestiges of the printing side are kind of getting in the way, but I think it's happening. So I would say probably 5 years from now, this is going to be really seamless. Right now, it's a little clunky. I don't mind saying. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so that is a great question. So sure, so thank you. Yeah, the question is, okay, you've got 500 people and they've got a lot of distractions in class. How do you keep them engaged? So I look at two things. The first is that I try to do something half an hour in that gets their attention back. Sometimes it's being really silly and stupid. So if you've ever heard, does anybody know what screaming goats are? So sometimes I'll just play a screaming goat. Well, I'm going to do it for absolutely no reason. I hope you laugh. If you've never seen this before, and this dates me, I apologize. But if you want to get, you have to, and this is not intended to be entertaining. This is intended to make sure everyone's about to hear me because I'm going to say something important. So if something important comes up, I will play something like this. You can't make that up. You just can't make that up. So that is something that I look for, and I'm always reading the students to see if they're asleep. It takes 30 seconds, and suddenly they're back. They're paying attention to me.
Some people say that there's only 12 minutes of attention span for
something with the students or have them do something.
Right.
There's a progress to that.
Right, and I believe that. And so what I do is, instead of just having them take notes, they have these things that, for example, this is what we did Monday. So they have a packet that I print out for them and give them. And what I do is I use the freeze function on the document camera, and I say, okay, I've explained how this is going to look. I draw it out, but under freeze, so they can't see it. And I say, fill that in, box at a time, instead of just blindly copying what I'm doing. And by doing this, number one, I'm saving them the time of the stuff they don't have to write. That's just kind of mundane. But the thinking part, they have to fill in those blanks. And so we're doing 2 or 3 of these a day in class. And so that there's that activity where instead of just saying, copy me, it's, guess what this is going to be? Talk to your friends. What's it going to be? And then at the bottom, for example, they have to use the reaction they just learned. And I'll say, talk to your friends. Get this right. Let's make sure you got this. There's a mechanism up above. Figure out how to translate that into a reaction. That's what my class is all about. And so I have them doing that because I completely agree with that. So if I'm finding myself droning on for, I probably have an internal clock of about 20 minutes. And I look around and they're like, you know, doing that kind of thing. They're going to hear screaming goat. They don't know why, but that's why I'm doing it. Because this is a big challenge. And again, it's not to be entertaining, it's to get their attention. But you gotta laugh at Bon Jovi and a goat, yeah. 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 Yeah, the clicker thing, there's a bandwidth issue in a lot of our lecture halls, so I use a manual clicker, which is I have them raise their hand. It's amazing, that one never runs out of battery. Right, right, see that's right. And that's the thing I lose. Yeah. And that's an important thing to do, because I completely agree with your 12-minute thing. Yeah. 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 So that's where organic chemistry, so the question was, how do I know they're learning the content? And I will say that I have an incredible advantage over most other content that people teach. Because the whole point of organic chemistry is to apply very complicated algorithms of understanding and predicting chemical behavior to new situations. So what's really unique about this class is you cannot memorize your way to success when I throw at them new molecules they've never seen before, and there's always something new added. And so by the way the exams are created, by that algorithm, I know that they could not have memorized it, and that they have to have actually learned the material, and it's new. I require some creativity on the back of every exam. In particular, that whole idea of the roadmap. What I do at the end of every exam, and I tell them this is the point of the class. The point of the class is organic synthesis, taking really inexpensive starting materials, carrying out several reactions, creating a very complex molecule, and then selling it to people for a lot of money. That actually defines the economies of the world, and that's what organic chemists do. But that's what I have them do. You can't memorize that. You can only learn it. And that's really the key to the whole class, is getting them to focus on that learning. And so this is really interesting, because the students who walk in think science classes are all about multiple choice questions. Because in their high school programs, that was true, almost invariably. Not all, but the majority of students think that. We do teach something totally differently, which is these are these very complicated algorithms where you have to recognize what's important in the molecule, ignore the part that's not, then understand those mechanisms like that sheet. So here's a new molecule they've never seen before. What's going to happen in the context of this new molecule they have to apply this complicated mechanistic interpretation, and then they get that. Well, they then have to take that and then carry out 2 more reactions, and that's what my class is all about. So uniquely, I know they're learning it because they can't memorize their way around it. Other content, I'm not sure you could ever say that, but I'm fairly confident of that, and that's common to organic chemistry. So, yeah.
We just switched to Canvas, so we're going through that. Oh my God, I have to let go of my laptop title. In my case, I just was a very meager first semester Canvas program. And I look at this, and how long will it take you to build this? How much has to get rebuilt every year?
Nothing has to get rebuilt this year except I changed the date. Yeah, and that's the point because this sits on my computer.
But it looks to me like it took you about 10 years to get this.
15.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to hide that. So I add 1 thing a year. You know, some important things like students don't do this. This is the best way to lose points on an exam. And so these are all the don't do these. Things like that. That was 1 year, and then we just keep adding things. You can go, yeah, see, this is not protected. This is not EID protected. You just go Iverson Organic Chemistry, and you're on the site. The last thing I wanted to tell you is probably the most important, actually, so I'm saving that to last. And that has to do with, you know, we all have these moments where there's a moment of clarity after a decade of fog. And the moment of clarity that I had was that my office hours were a lot like the vitamin industry. So you may not know this, but the people who buy vitamins are exactly the ones who don't need them because they already eat well. Because the ones who go to the vegetable aisle are also the ones who get vitamins. Question?
Let's say about general, brothers, they all went into education. I went into all of this. So one thing I learned about them, been around family educators, that while my health, that I noticed about them is that teaching education is a calling. And it's really, I really feel like it's really a calling. And the way educators interact with students on a level that I don't think that can be achieved in a super classroom. I think even on told students out there where internet told me online class. Classes may be, you still have interaction. The instructor, you really feel your way with the instructor. That instructor really not engage you, feel you, get you really to understand the material and find out how you learn. Everybody's learning a little bit different. That's why it's such a hard for a teacher. I just don't see the super classroom. You go to students, and you're enhanced education. Now, take away from the quality of education by taking away interaction of the teachers to the students.
So that is a perfect segue to what I was about to say. So your point, which is a great one, and it's the one that I worry about. So you weren't here at the beginning, so there were some things that I talked about of how I try to break down that barrier between so many students and me. I want them to see me as a person, not somebody on a stage. So that's part of it. But you know, how do you make it so that students have that interaction in a way that scales to a large class? We spent a lot of time thinking about this and rethinking about this. And that's what I was talking about, the vitamin industry, where what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create situations outside the lecture where students have access in a more personal way. And so we wanted to rethink that because what I used to do was stand up in front of a class And my office hours, again, the A students showed up. The ones I really wanted to reach weren't even there. And that's what I meant by it was like the vitamin industry, which nothing against vitamins. I'm just saying they're not really helping human health. My office hours were not helping my class. I was taking those A minuses to an A. That's fine, but I wanted to see where those C and D students were. So we did a lot of focus groups and said, okay, you know that office hours are helpful. Why aren't you there? What do you think the #1 answer was? They have to work. So we also noticed that when we had office hours set up where TAs would show up in a given room, we'd have 1 or 2 students walking in. That was not a useful thing for any of them. So we tried a whole lot of different formats over the last 10 years. But what I wanted to show you is this calendar. So every single day, there is a different kind of office hour that is designed to create the experience that's missing in the large lecture hall. Because, you know, I'm not going to lie. I don't teach a large class because I think it's a great thing to do. We have to do it. We do it. And I do it the best that I can. So here's something that we discovered. A number of students don't go to office hours because they're intimidated because the A students are asking questions they don't even understand, and they're not going to ask that question that's from 3 weeks ago. So we created an office hour, not run by me, but run by a hand-selected TA. We call it Miss the Wave. And those are the students who are asking questions that are not up to date. And if you have a question that's up to date, don't go to this. And this is a safe place for students to ask anything, and not being that I'm not running it, a TA, and that's what students want, they feel very comfortable asking questions. So on Monday, we have a Miss the Wave office hour that's run by my TA. I'm very, very, very lucky. My TA this year happens to be a graduate student in my lab who also took the class in 2012. He knows exactly what they're going through and exactly what they're having trouble with. And so that was one office hour. Then on Tuesdays and Fridays, we have problem sessions. So you can look at virtually every study about how to help students get better. The absolute most effective thing you can do is challenge them with harder problems than they're ever going to see, and then let them work on them and then walk around and help them. So instead of someone standing up and talking, what we do is we have these office hours where all of the TAs show up in one room. They present very difficult problems, and then they walk around to all the students answering all of their individual questions as they're working in groups on the problems. That's on Tuesdays and Fridays. Strangely enough, no matter how many times I tried to avoid this, they wanted me to stand up and do a classic office hour in a classroom. Some students demanded that I do that, so I do that on Wednesdays, and that's what's on Wednesdays from 5 to 6. But the most important thing we do is this thing right here. So it turns out on Thursdays from 5:30 to 7, we do an online live office hour where I'm in a studio, and they can bring in, and all they have to do is click on this. They just click on this, and they can join the class, they can join the chat, and it's real time. It's an office hour that's virtual, but they don't have to be there. So this is run through the College of Liberal Arts, and they just have, so this is the setup that they use for synchronous online courses. But I'm just using that studio off hours, which they don't mind because it's 5:30 to 7, but it's hours that are designed to be in a time frame that's most convenient to my students after we did a poll. And so it's an hour and a half, and they ask questions. I have TAs who are answering the questions. So it's not operating because this isn't Thursday at 5:30. If it was, you would have a live feed of all the questions that are coming in. My TAs are answering some of them in real time for everybody, and then I'm answering the ones they forward to me as if it was a regular office hour. This is recorded. And we analyzed the metrics on this. And what we saw is that the majority of students accessed this starting at 11 p.m., even though it was over at 7:30. And the reason is they were working. And in fact, we noticed that the more they logged into this, the better they were doing in the class. Because it was a real-time interaction that they could use that would actually work. They didn't have to come back to campus. Yeah.
So what happens is in real time, you're answering questions that are coming in across the internet.
Right.
And then it's
Right. And then it replays, again, it's not operating because it's not there. But if it was, you would be seeing a live feed that had to do with everybody's questions and answers, as well as on your screen is going to be me in a studio. Right. Right. And I use a document camera to answer. One of the interesting things that I started doing, which was kind of funny, is I always felt that something that's missing from modern science classes is we don't tell the history of our field anymore because we don't have time. And so I realized this is like free time. So we created something called A Moment in History, and I'll talk about different chemists that we've learned about, and talk about their lives, and talk about how they developed, you know, where they are, where they've gone. And strangely enough, I did it to kill time, but they love it. They love to hear about this. It's not going to be tested. Another trick, by the way, to getting back to your question that I think is very important is I do molecules of the day. When I think, you know, when I don't want to use the GOAT or anything like that, I'll talk about a molecule that they've heard about that's really important. And, you know, we're going to talk about opioids pretty soon. They've gotten enough chemistry I can actually tell them what opioids are all about and why they're so dangerous. And so that's really important. That'll be 5 minutes, and they know it's not going to be on an exam. So I'll do that as well to break things up. Because I think your questions, and you know, I think your question back there was really the right question, is how do you break down this barrier with so many people and turn it into an interaction? And you just have to be very purposeful about it. It's not perfect. I guarantee you my students would learn more if I had 12 of them meeting for me alone for that hour. But that's not my world. Yeah. Okay.
Feedback on the athlete asking about like how we work the virtual lessons with all the time. So easy to do this on Zoom. Yeah, I was thinking Zoom could do it.
Yeah, probably can. Yeah, that's right. Everything I've talked about is recorded. So when I went to that page that linked to the lectures, embedded in there were all of these things that are recorded so students don't have to be there. And that's really a key. Now, from a faculty member's point of view, this cost me 0 time and effort. I just, at the beginning of the semester, arranged to have these things recorded. There's only a few rooms that will record things. We just make sure we schedule things in those rooms. And it really does, I think, help gain access. Well, that's the point about the 1% on the homework. They're not really gaining anything. So it doesn't, that was actually, it was my TA, Joe. He's now a professor at Denison. That was his insight. So no, make it 1%. It's enough to make them motivated, but not enough to cause any sort of weird behavior because they know that that doesn't matter. You know, it seems pretty hollow. I'm getting my 1% by copying this, but wait a minute, there's going to be 30% on the exam is going to count on this, so I better learn it. So I think that's, maybe I'm over-interpreting it, but I don't really worry about it. And I did have a very strange experience. I posted my old exams, because you all know this, but people keep copies of their old exams in certain organizations, most of which have Greek letters. And certain students are seeing all your old exams if you teach a big class. And other students don't have access, and I thought that was unfair. So I posted the last 2 years of my exams on my website. And I had a student walk up to me, this was about 5 years ago, and say, you know, there's some Greek organizations that have all your old exams, and I don't think that's fair. And I said, you really want all my old exams? All of them? And I said, no one ever asked. So then I posted them all. I said, look, it's like hiding numbers in a phone book. I mean, I could pick, I don't, but I could pick questions from old exams, and now that I've posted all of them, they're never going to find them. But they actually use these, and so it's really important, I think, to post the old exams. Why? Because when they're studying for their exam, in my opinion, now have a lot to learn, but I try to make those exams a true assessment of student learning. So if they're going to be studying something, I want them to be doing those because they are assessing their own learning and they have the questions and the answers are posted online. So it's one of the most frequently hit places on my website is actually that.
Well, the other thing about exams, students have to learn how to take your exam.
Yeah.
Like, I always give my students examples of last semester, the last year's exams, and say, here's how to answer these questions. I mean, different questions, particularly, it's the same kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah, and these go all the way back to 2003. Questions and answers, with and without answers, however they want to do it, they're all there. That means no one has an advantage. No one has a disadvantage. I'll tell you what, by the time the class is over, this is by far the most hit hit page on my site. And I don't mind because they're doing exactly what I want. But I do warn them, the class is getting harder. So as things have progressed, I've had to make the course harder and harder. So if they look at a 2003 exam, they're going to be shocked. Wow, this was easy. Because I expect a lot more now, because the students are able to do a lot more by the time they get to the end. But I think this is very helpful. Some faculty don't like the answers out there. I do. It means I have to make a new exam every time. But like I said, you get to the point where literally I could take questions off all these old exams. It's like hiding a number code in the phone book. They'll never, for people who remember what phone books were, they'll never find it. Yeah.
It's a funny anecdote. 2 years ago, I tell my students, the final exam will be summation of all the exams. So if you have the exam, you grade and correct and all that. You get 100. Sure. Last year, I had 2 girls that sat beside each other instead of 30 days. So they had D for the class because they had before that. So after Christmas, they came up with an option. When they get music, they each have 30 days. I said, you both sat together. And they just got you're not going to believe it. You're not going to believe it. You told us to start the same thing with 100. Yes, they did. What they did is they started the same thing, so I can have to change the order of questions. So they all memorized 4 or 5 pages of A, B, C, D, E. And so then you thought,
Well, this is an important point because I'm seeing this and I see it. So I've had 3 girls graduate from UT and my 4th is there right now. They are constantly looking for that method that prevents the learning but gives them the score. So when I start my class, I always start with this quote because it helps me explain that to them because I now know this is going to happen. So the first day, I always talk about this. Number 1, right there. Everything should be made as simple as possible, no simpler. And I say, I am pledging to you, I have made this as simple as it is. Do not try to make it simpler. Because I'm getting at this thing like, oh, wait, I can beat the system by doing it this way, I get my score. And of course, I could care less about their score. I care about their understanding. And so I pull that out over and over again during the semester and say, you know what, if it was that easy. So I'll give you one that you'll immediately appreciate because you probably fight this every time. So we start doing stereoselective reactions. So they want to know with the given starting alkene, how many stereoisomers are they going to get? It's not like that. It might be 1, it might be 3, it might be 5, it might be 4. But they want that table. They think I'm holding it back. And I have to deprogram them to think that there's a shortcut to explain that I have given them the shortcut. And that's new. It's not a criticism because I know they're just a product of where they came from. But boy, I know exactly, I fight that. I think they need some deprogramming. Yeah.
Over the years, have you noticed a change in the student's ability to find it, to think on their own? Is it getting better?
I had a really bad second exam on spring semester, second semester organic chemistry. I didn't teach these students first semester, but I inherited them second semester. They totally flamed out, crashed and burned on the second midterm. I was so exasperated. I didn't know what to do, but I was afraid it was this. I was expecting something that wasn't expected first semester. They didn't know what to do. And it's because unless they have everything in their head, they don't feel comfortable. And what I ask them to do is to take algorithms to apply to new situations. And so we know that as educators as moving up Bloom's taxonomy. Now, I don't believe that in detail, but the concepts are real. That instead of being at the lowest level, they have to put things together. So out of total exasperation, I threw up the Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. And then I showed them that the problem was that they were uncomfortable going past the bottom. But then I showed them how the different kinds of questions I was asking went all the way to the top. But then I showed them the tools that we had built into the course that allowed them to operate at that level. And they aced the third midterm. Now, I don't know if there's a cause and effect, but I got so many nods when I did that. And I said, this is why this class is unnerving to you, because you're not used to this kind of thing. And they're looking for those shortcuts, and they don't exist. And if they did, I would tell them.
Well, unfortunately, high school, because of the whole testing movement, they only want to take it a little bit. And I think we're all frustrated here with the freshmen and sophomores that just don't seem to know. But they're not stupid kids.
No.
Not at all. They just haven't learned how to learn.
Yeah.
I think that's one.
One question from our side last Zoom, and it was, you have a late work policy, and so what is it?
A what?
Late work policy?
Yeah, that it's not accepted. So for example, the written homeworks are due before class starts, and as soon as I say good afternoon, it doesn't matter who does what, they're not accepted. When it comes to these electronic quizzes, they turn off the minute class starts, and that's it. And for my exam, now here, this is actually a very important point. Very important point. Midterms. What the bleep do you do to give 500 midterms? Well, number one, you can't pass out 500 midterms in under about 5 minutes. That's record breaking. Number two, you have to have glaucoma not to see what's happening next to you in those lecture halls. So there's no way you could expect that to be reasonable. So what we have to do is we have to give out-of-class exams. So it turns out the exams are mine are Thursday nights. From 8 to 10, I give them 2 hours for a 1-hour exam. But they sit every other seat, and we get 2 or 3 different classrooms around the campus from 8 to 10. Those times are in the course catalog, so when they sign up for the class, they know it. Now here's a self-defense. I used to require them to take all 3 midterms. And then I had literally lines of students walking in saying what their excuse was. And as the Chronicle of Higher Education has verified, it's very dangerous to be a grandparent during midterms and finals because they all die. It's true. Don't let your grandparents ever be on a ladder or drive a car during midterms or finals. They just all die. And so I was there trying to interpret excuses, plus or minus. Are you real? Is that not real? And it was just ridiculous. And so my colleagues, I finally relented on this. And I have a policy where I count 2 of the 3 midterms. We drop the lowest score, even if that's a 0, because they don't show up. No excuses. I don't want to hear it. It doesn't matter. And so I have to have these hard and fast rules. And once you get that across, and you can do it with a smile, but once you get that across, they're okay with it. And they realize there's no room for anything in the class. Yeah.
Do you have an instructional designer for your TAs helping you with it? This seems like an awful lot of stuff to set up.
You know what? It's only a lot of stuff the first time. I now have a checklist that I go through what office hour rooms I need, what studio do I need, when my exams are going to be, what classrooms I have. I have a checklist so that now it's just a matter of checking things off. At the beginning, it was ridiculous. And I would screw up. But it's not bad after you get used to it. But it takes me probably one morning a month before the class starts, but I know I'm going to spend that morning, and that's what I do. That's probably no different than any class you set up. You have to spend that morning figuring out what you're going to be. I don't think it's that different. Yeah.
Post-assessment or post-exam item analysis question, how many students may achieve 25 or so, and you see that the majority of the students, 70% students, this one question. Maybe the question haven't been was wrong, or maybe it should be given from whatever that could be.
Yeah. So yeah, your question, just to repeat it, is so what happens if it looks like a lot of your students don't get a particular question correct? You know, what do I do? So I can't quantitatively do that because they're graded by hand. But qualitatively, all the TAs who are grading know that if there is not 80% or so students getting a given question right, I want to know about it. And then what I'll do is I'll reteach that the day after the exam. I'll say, you know what, we don't have your scores yet, but we know this caused a lot of trouble. So I'm just going to reteach this because obviously I wasn't getting it right the first time. So here, I'm going to do this again. That's one of the things that I learned a long time ago, really get students to realize you're invested in their learning. And so I look for those situations where I can actually do that. I find that very helpful. But it's qualitative. If I had electronic exams, it could be quantitative. We don't do multiple choice. We don't do Scantron. So I can't really get that quantitatively. Yeah.
I do have quantitative data, so for questions like that, I post them back on Canvas after and retake questions, let them use any course to answer them,
Yeah.
and then I give them the points back.
See, I would love to do something like that, but I can't. Yeah, I would love to do something like that. I just can't do that. You know, millions of dollars have been spent trying to create a software program that reproduces students drawing things. I know that because I was trying to help my publisher do it, and it's been a total fail. And I think someone will make this happen at some point. But right now, it takes 3 times as long to enter a molecule on a computer as it does to do this. And that's just a waste of the student's time. But I think we have a real handicap in my particular field, because if I could do something better, I would. But they have to draw structures, they have to draw arrows, they have to draw dots, letters, and it just doesn't work on a computer yet. So. I have to show you something that happened last Sunday morning that was brought to my attention. We were both at a conference, a chemistry conference. This was brought to my attention by some chemists, and I just want to show this because this really made me laugh. And I think it's an indication of what you were talking about. I may be overinterpreting this, but I think this is pretty funny. So this is a young man who lives in Houston, Texas, who went to the pennant clinching game that was going to determine if Houston goes to the World Series. And so this young man was interviewed on Channel 2 in Houston. We'll see if we get the sound on here. Make sure the sound's on. No, hello, Mom. No, hi, Dad. Hey, I'm glad I'm going to the game. It's, man, I can't even go to the World Series unless you reschedule my test. And do you think I did? Of course not. There's no way I was going to reschedule the test. But I did give him a hero's welcome on Monday, saying, you have someone here who is looking out for all of your backs to try to get this test moved. Unfortunately, we can't do it. But I think that I hope is an indication that this barrier has been broken down if he was willing to do that. So that got back to me from all my friends in Houston. This is the stuff that I was talking about. And again, I do want to end with one really important statement. I don't think I've got this all figured out. I'm just telling you what I've been doing and have learned over the last 25 years. But I think especially with the new advances in technology that we can use to leverage what we're doing, as long as we maintain that human interaction, which you have to work at, I think that the availability of the information and do analytics and that kind of thing can really inform what we do in a powerful way. And I don't see it as humans versus technology. It's working together. And I'm never going to be done trying to figure out how to make this work better. Yeah, that's a huge advantage. We have 1 TA for every 100 students. Yeah, it would be nice, although they feel quite abused, so don't tell them that that's a nice ratio. Especially when they grade the exams. This is actually a huge problem. Literally, they stack up like this. So think about it. 500 students is 1 ream of paper per page. A 20-page midterm or final is 20 reams of paper. It is literally like that. And so what we do, and we have to, is the department pays all the graduate students, and it's just, they know this is what's going to happen during midterms and finals. They all come, they grade a question, and they all get paid a small amount, which when you're a graduate student, that's the difference between eating well or mac and cheese, and so they'll come. It's probably not ethical, but we've been doing it for the last 100 years in chemistry, and we're going to continue doing it. But that's an issue. I think in organic chemistry in particular, if you don't have TAs, I don't know what you do. Yeah.
On the online exams, you do have open questions that have to be graded by a thinking person.
For which?
For your midterm.
No, my midterms are paper.
Your midterm, the exam they take electronically.
Oh, the quizzes? No, I can't do that. I would love to. I can't. The quizzes, they're really simple fill-in questions. Yeah. No, I wish. Yeah, I wish. I just don't know a way around that yet. Someone will figure it out. Maybe that guy who went to the game. By the way, he was there on Monday. He did not go to the World Series. He did not go to Los Angeles.